Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Rory Truex. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an associate professor in the politics department and the School of Public International Affairs at Princeton University. This is the Civic Forum. This is a space where people can come together to think about the bigger picture questions facing our democracy, featuring people who study it, people who are working to protect it and make it better. So today I'm excited. I've been really looking forward to this session for many months now. We are going to be joined by Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat. Ruth is a professor of history and Italian studies at NYU. She writes about fascism, authoritarianism, propaganda, and democracy protection. She is a recipient of the Guggenheim grant and other fellowships, an advisor to protect democracy, and you might have seen her on MSNBC, CNN, PBS, and many other networks. I should say at a personal level, Ruth is a role model for many of us who study authoritarianism. She's used her expertise to really raise awareness about authoritarian politics and practices in the US and elsewhere. And if you don't have this book already, this is one that should be on your shelves. This is Strongmen by Ruth. It kind of describes the nature of authoritarian practices and the kind of authoritarian playbook and how it's evolved over time from Mussolini to the present. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor Ruth Ben-Ghiat.
Great. Really pleased to be here. And I'm basically, for these introductory remarks, going to talk about what is being done right now in the US that is part of the classics authoritarian playbook, and then talk about what I see as different or innovative, and innovative not in a good way. It doesn't, you're all here following this and other sessions because you're likely very concerned with what's happening to our, not just our democracy politically defined, but our society. And, the Trump administration is kind of checking all the boxes on what authoritarians do to capture institutions, terrorize society, forge relations with other autocracies. And so one definition of authoritarianism is kind of political and legalistic. And that is, the expansion of the executive to domesticate and politicize the formerly democratic institutions. So you're all following what's going on at the DOJ, the judiciary under an autocrat must become a personal tool, and the personal is very important. And one of the concepts I work with in my book Strongmen and subsequent writing I do is that Trump, like many autocrats, is a personalist ruler. And there's Erica France and colleagues have written a book on personalist dictatorships. And this is a genre of authoritarianism, and that was the criteria for the people who were in my book. Including Trump. Trump 1.0 was in my book. When they personalize power so that the purpose of governance has nothing to do with collective well-being, public welfare. It has to do with enriching the leader and his cronies, and Orban has done a good job of that. Of course, Putin has a full-blown kleptocracy. And turning the institutions, the judiciary included, into weapons for punishing his personal enemies. We see that happening, the weaponization of justice, and making him feel safe, because the autocrat knows very well all of his crimes and is always scurrying around to re-engineer government so that he can feel safe. Now, Trump was granted this giant prize from the Supreme Court that the office of the president has immunity for official acts, and that helps a lot, but nothing can extinguish the fear of the strongman that he will be found out, somehow prosecuted. And so we see this kind of, and I want to urge people to think about this transformation of the judiciary. I'm using that as an example in a global framework. And so it can't just be because a lot of these people they operate in a criminal way on a transnational scale. They are allied. And so it can't just be domesticating the judiciary at home. Ideally, you will discredit the International Criminal Court, for example. and transnational, international concepts of justice. So one thing you can do is invite people, back people who have arrest warrants from the ICC, like Putin, or invite one of them, Netanyahu, to Washington and validate him. And so China and Russia have been working together since 2021 to discredit international justice. So I want you to keep that in mind. So the other thing that Trump has done very effectively that's classical is the idea of the authoritarian bargain. And I also work with this in my book, that you forge these bargains with elites. And elites, one of the great scholars of autocracy says that elites make and break the strongmen. So you forge these bargains, these deals with religious institutions, business, media, and I don't need to tell you how that's going on very effectively in the States. And it's that they have the chance to get more profits in return for not criticizing you or for being loyal to you. And Trump has been highly effective with religious institutions, both Orthodox Jews and evangelical Christians. And the religious institution, the religious elites can be particularly effective at legitimizing a corrupt strongman. And one of my maxims is the more corrupt they become, the more they need the aura of holiness around them. So that's important, this kind of bargains with elites. And so it's very sad that there's all these capitulations, obeying in advance, and now all these deals that educational institutions are making, and he's just doing this kind of shakedown politics, shakedown approach to governance, which is why Bill Emmett, the former editor of The Economist, calls his brand of politics a gangster politics, and likens him to a mafia boss. So, okay. So all of that and the National Purity Campaign, that is typical of strongmen. I have a chapter on that too. This is like my book is coming to life. It's in a terrible way. And you identify one internal enemy at the beginning, and of course others will follow. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. And you use that enemy, in this case immigrants, to justify your ideologies of fanaticism, of purity, but also to justify building an infrastructure of repression. And once you've built that, you can put other people in there too. So that's the immigrant. The immigrants are absolutely fundamental for this. So I want to talk about the ways that I see this as unfolding in an innovative or unusual way. With respect to the autocracies of the past and also the present. There is no parallel, practically, outside of coming to power via coup for the speed at which this assault on our freedoms, which is holistic in nature, public health, the economy, benefits. I mean, think of one as science, education. They have achieved in, just like a half year, what usually takes even early Putin, early Orban, it takes several years to accomplish. And of course, they've done that because he was in power before. And if you read Strongmen, you'll see how almost everything being done is a continuation of what was started. And even if you think about Chile, is a well-known, the Chilean coup in 1973. And it's famous for not only being the start of a military dictatorship that was backed by the US, but a laboratory for neoliberal policies, the Chicago Boys. So Pinochet comes in the fall of 73. Milton Friedman doesn't come to Chile until 75. And so they have 2 years go by before they even start implementing or even doing these reforms. Here, because of also Project 2025 was like a shadow government they used their time brilliantly when Trump was out of office, brilliantly. But people are going to write books about that. And so Project 2025 really was a kind of shadow government, so much so that when Orban twice came to the States, He didn't go to see Biden. He was snubbing Biden because he was delegitimizing democracy. He went 2 places. He went to Mar-a-Lago to see Trump, who was styling himself. Remember, he won the election supposedly as a kind of wronged strongman in internal exile. And Orban went to the Heritage Foundation in DC. That's where he did this twice. So that's one reason that this was able to take shape so fast, all of this stuff. And of course, that Trump had domesticated the GOP so thoroughly. And that's another classic strongman thing. The other is Elon Musk. And please do not believe that Elon Musk has really truly stepped back. Doge is expanding. It is a total tragedy. Doge, it has, I started talking about Elon Musk's action as a coup in February 2025. And nowhere on earth has, so that the classic oligarch autocrat relationship is that the oligarch is outside government. And they help the strongmen by buying up properties, media properties, banks, or whatever, and making them allies. And that goes into the idea of the elite. Here, Musk had everything. He was the poor little rich boy. What did he lack? He lacked a way to infiltrate a sovereign government. And venal Trump gave him that opportunity, handed in the key to go inside the government of a sovereign power, and thus Doge was created. And so Musk created essentially a kind of digital shock troops, a private civil service. And I haven't looked for about a week, but first they were in May, they were in 32 agencies. They had effectively taken over a lot of and captured the data. And now they're in over 36 agencies. And so he may have stepped back, and so the news cycle, the media lost interest in him somewhat, but Doge has continued to expand, and that I've never seen. So the oligarch was invited to be part of the government, and he was holding meetings on presidential property, Musk, with foreign heads of state. I have a picture of him with Modi. So this is new and nefarious. And you may hear stuff about, our Vice President Vance, who is in there by the will of another techno-fascist, Peter Thiel, who backed his Senate race, backed his companies, and Vance is the proxy of these guys. And so sometimes you read stuff about them trying to get Trump impeached, and then Vance would take over as the proxy for these people. So don't count out Musk, and do just keep a frame of reference, because this is the U.S. is a laboratory for something new. And then I will close by saying that before I gave you a definition of authoritarian that was more political, institutional, legalistic, but the real devastation of authoritarianism is because authoritarianism is a system where the rights of the many are taken away in order for the few, the very few, to have unheard of liberties to plunder, to exploit the workforce, the environment. Think of anything, bodies, make slave labor, women's bodies. And that is the real action of authoritarianism as it affects millions of people. And so we're in a kind of laboratory of the very few. Think about the transfer of wealth with the big beautiful bill, which I call the ugly bellicose bill. And so that is an action that is going on at grand scale, and it tracks with that other definition of authoritarianism, taking away the rights of the many in order to give the very few unheard of freedoms to plunder. So I'll stop there.
Ruth, thank you so much. And I wanted to pick up on the distinction between conservative government and authoritarian government, because a lot of times there will be kind of popular discourse. So people are labeling Trump authoritarian because it's sour grapes, right? They the liberals lost, the Democrats lost, and so they're using this moniker of authoritarian or fascist to discredit him, and he was democratically elected. And so, can you be precise about what makes Trump authoritarian, kind of the difference between good old-fashioned conservative government and authoritarian government? Because a lot of these figures, Bukele, Orban, go on down the list, they paint themselves as just sort of family values, traditional conservative government, but they're using authoritarian tactics and eroding the institutions of democracy that got them to power. So can you just be precise about the distinction between conservatism and authoritarianism, and what makes it different for you?
I would say conservatism still operates in a framework of democracy. Authoritarianism considers democracy an enemy to be vanquished. If the GOP were at all conservative, it would not have supported January 6th, which was an attempt to overthrow the government, first overturn it by denying the results, and then unleashing a violent mob against GOP and Democratic lawmakers who called their loved ones and thought they were going to die, and also trying to plot against one of the most right-wing politicians, or you could say conservative, Mike Pence, who was targeted for physical harm on January 6th and wouldn't even get into the car. We have to remember these things. Wouldn't even get into the Secret Service car because he had an instinct or he had information. So if you were really a conservative, you would not be down for that. So that is a sign. And January 6th was highly effective at shocking the GOP, precisely because they were targeted. They could have lost their lives. There were, then studies now is that it was only 30 seconds that separated Mike Pence from a bad fate. So they're not conservatives. The other thing but your question gets at what makes it sometimes more difficult to understand authoritarianism today, because it masquerades as Orban's term, illiberal democracy. It uses the institutions of democracy to then discredit democracy. So today we have what we call electoral autocracy. So today, and this is a big difference with what still hangs around, one-party states are still hanging around North Korea, China, and many other places. But today, you don't need to get rid of elections to be an authoritarian. You keep them, and Orban and also Erdogan in Turkey, we should, let's not get started on him. He always gets a pass, Erdogan, but both of them have done an excellent job of keeping elections going while actually gaming the system so that things work out the way they need them to. And one way Orban did this is by domesticating the media, so that 85 to 90% of the media is Orban centric. And that meant that in the last presidential election, nobody heard the message of the opposition candidate outside of Budapest and some other big cities. They're just not putting them on air. And in fact, that candidate couldn't get on national TV. So that's one way. And there are many, many, many other tricks you use. So we shouldn't consider we shouldn't believe the scam of autocrats when they say, as Erdogan does, what do you mean I'm a dictator? We have elections here, because that's not how authoritarianism works today.
And I think one thing you're hinting at is that these moments are confusing for people. Sort of the slide from electoral democracy, sort of fully liberal democracy, to a weaker version of democracy, to electoral autocracy. A lot of these places never get to that closed, what we call closed autocracy, one party. They hang around in that muddy middle ground. And so it's hard for people to understand that ambiguity, and all of it is done with pretext, right? And Sue Stokes, who's coming in a few weeks, has a new book coming out on backsliding, and she uses the phrase trash talking democracy. So these leaders will bash the courts and bash elections and then use that logic to undermine them, right? So our elections are rigged, therefore we're going to have gerrymandered districts, or we're going to get rid of the Voting Rights Act, or on and on and on, right? And so this idea of pretext and cover, I think, is really an important thing.
And one of the very important things that, and Trump has been brilliant at this, truly brilliant. If you're working inside a still democratic system, you must engage in a work of delegitimation. And let's just keep with the judicial system, but it extends to more. You must discredit and smear and target as biased and rigged all facets of the democratic institutions. So judges, prosecutors, lawyers who won't, do your bidding, even elections. Everything must be discredited as rigged, and the authority of those judges and prosecutors must be tarnished through smear campaigns, through investigations, anything that's going to lead people to think that justice is rigged, elections are rigged, and so we can't. And the purpose of this is to transfer the trust and confidence that you should have as a citizen of a democracy or a dweller in a democracy to the leader, who is the only arbiter of truth and justice and all of that. But think about how effective Trump has been at Trump and company. When I say Trump, it's also MAGA and all of the media ecosystem. He's also done this with educational authorities, scientific authorities, any kind of authority who adheres to democratic values and democratic notions of objectivity, impartiality, independence. All of them must go. All of them must be targeted for smear campaigns. And so that's what allows somebody trying to get to power in a democracy to use the system against itself.
For me, one thing I've noticed that I think is alarming, but also interesting as a tactic is the use of the big lie about 2020 as a mechanism of domination. That's a big theme in your book and the authoritarian politics literature, is that these guys use lies to dominate other elites, and this idea that the election was stolen, and now we have roughly 70% of the Republican voter base, likely higher, believing that the 2020 election was stolen. And then that putting all of the Republican Congress people, other elites, in this position of you either affirm the lie or you lose, right? We're going to primary you. And we remember that moment in the debate between Vance and Waltz, where Waltz asked him point blank, can we agree that, I forget, I'm paraphrasing, but can we talk about the 2020 election? And Vance dodged the question and said, I'd rather not get into the past. So this idea, this domination, attacking the institutions, but also as a form of domination, I find that, to me, I'm fixated on this. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I'm still focused on the big lie, but to me, it's the underlying, that particular moment was when the GOP sort of lost its grasp on reality, and it's lost its moniker as a normal pro-democracy party.
Totally. And I also study propaganda. There's a chapter in Strongmen, and you must have message discipline. And when you have a lie, you need to consolidate. What that you mentioned about Vance was a loyalty performance. That's another sign, check the box, that we are in authoritarian territory, that the lie must be constantly maintained and all must recite the lie over and over again. In fact, it's become a precondition for joining the government. So who would Trump be without this big lie? He'd be a loser. He'd be nowhere and a no one, right? And it was very interesting to me. So Strongmen came out with the last edition in 2021. And in 2022, I get a message from a lawyer at CNN. And Trump was suing CNN for $475 million over being associated with Hitler. And I was mentioned in this suit. The only I don't have a contract with CNN. I would just write op-eds for them. And out of all the 1,200 op-eds they publish every year, one pissed them off. And it was my piece on the big lie. And it said, who would he be without the big lie? And it talked about how the 30,000 Washington Post documented lies, little lies he told, prepared the public to accept the big lie. So it unmasked the process of leading people to accept a big lie, and then the importance that that big lie had as a mechanism of loyalty, of the whole thing. And it said, it actually gave him a compliment, saying that, guess what? He did this without a one-party state like Hitler. He did this with he managed to get tens of millions of people to believe his lie, working in a democracy with a fully pluralistic media environment. That's impressive. But it was very interesting to me that that was the op-ed that pissed somebody off so much that it appeared. It was Jake Tapper, Chris Chalitza, they were full-time employees, and me, a freelancer. And so that told me that I was on the right path. And I think the wounding of the strongmen, who would he be without his lie, landed, and nothing happened to me. A judge dismissed the whole suit, but that was instructive.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about elites, and elites matter so much in these systems. And you talked about personalism. A key aspect of personalism is the consolidation of power around one person. And there are other elites floating around in the GOP, people like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, people who have high ambitions that are put in this strange position of, do I go along for this ride, or do I defect and stand up for democracy and stay loyal to democracy? Can you talk a little bit about elite defection and, frankly, how it can be encouraged? I think one thing we need to do as a kind of a pro-democracy movement is create the space for people to say, this is wrong, I was wrong, I shouldn't have gone along with this. And that pro-democracy coalition needs to include people like John Bolton, people who have served in Republican administrations, right? It needs to be as big a tent as possible, and we need to create that space. So talk to me a little bit about how you think about elite defection and its importance, and how it can be encouraged at this particular moment, because I think that is one of the key factors about how this will play out.
It is. It's very key. I think if we think about this comparatively, it's really tougher here because we have our bipartisan system, which is a kind of like it's around our neck right now. Because when you have a multi-party system, there's more flexibility and people have other places to go. And this is regular people as well as elites. They could start new parties. And by the way, a lot of like Bukele, Meloni, these are heads of state who are authoritarians, who their parties are only 12, less than 12 years old. Bukele is much more recent than that. So you can start parties. And in situations of elite defection, that allows people to get out of the stronghold, the party that's become the tool of the leader. We don't have that option. So all that was able to happen was the sight of Kamala Harris standing with so many former Republicans from military and national security. They had defected, so to speak, and they were appearing and they were saying they were going to vote Democrat for the first time. That happened, but it's very difficult to get politicians and people who have positions within the GOP. One reason is the effectiveness, and this is check another box of authoritarianism, of physical threat of violence. And we are in a very unusual situation in the world. So it's not only we're hamstrung by bipartisan, but by gun violence. And Bolton, like Pompeo and many others, had his security clearance taken away, his details taken away. Now, you could say, well, these people have enough money, they could hire private security. I'm sure some of them do. But that may seem a very specific thing, but when we're looking at elite defection, we have to think about motivations. But the principle of elite defection is absolutely key, because elites set the tone for other people are watching to see what they do. And that is why, and especially, I think there's more room in non-political elite defection, faith leaders, other kinds of elites, business elites. This is very frustrating to me. Media elites are sadly showing themselves to be hopeless, and that is also because of the concentration of our media into these huge conglomerates. It makes it more difficult. But so I'm not totally optimistic. Somebody like Marco Rubio, I'll remind everybody that he has 4 jobs. That's a very authoritarian thing. The reason that he's there, in my this is my personal estimation, he represents the man who was broken. Trump broke him morally, and then he could rebuild him. And so he is now a trusted sycophant. He's a trusted, and so he's been given more and more power. He's the head of the National Archives, like right now, and he's also the head. He's got 4 jobs, which is an example of authoritarian incompetence, right? Because they're paranoid, and so loyalists only must be in power. Nobody can do 4 jobs well. But he is there because he was able to be broken, which is very sad. I have a piece in Lucid, my Substack newsletter, about moral collapse. We are in a situation of moral collapse and the whole GOP has been broken and remade, and they will. And in it, I'll just end this with, in an Atlantic article of August 2016. I talked about the GOP, and I talked about authoritarian bargains, and that once elites sign on to protect the leader, they stick there no matter what he says or does. And I prophesied that I was comparing it to fascism, Italian fascism, and said that the parties that supported Mussolini to get to power vanished. They were not in existence after he left. And I said that's a lesson for the GOP. It's now it's different but it will survive, but it's morally bankrupt.
I want to talk about, you talked a little bit of comparatively, like the things about the US system that are actually difficult in terms of elite defection. There's nowhere for people to go. We're kind of stuck with this 2-party system that I think many people are dissatisfied with. In political science, it's interesting. When Trump came back to power, people who study comparative politics were generally terrified. People who were thinking about backsliding, you study Latin America or you study Eastern Europe, you pick your region. And then the Americanists, not uniformly, right? There's differences in opinion among them, and there's really good writing from a lot of my Americanist colleagues. But I think there was a feeling of what we would call democratic resilience in this country, right? Like it can't happen here. This isn't Hungary, this isn't Turkey, this isn't Brazil, go on down the list. We're different. And there are things that are different. The strength of our civil society, the strength of media organizations, the strength of our universities. Like this isn't our civic culture, our democratic culture. And so are there things, I'm going to tee you up to be optimistic because I have found I'm almost uniformly anxious and pessimistic. Are there things about the US that do give you more confidence? Is there something about our country, culturally, politically, that will give a little bit more resilience in this moment?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So just as it was very clear to me where we were going in January and February, I also wrote a piece called "A Reckoning Will Come," and I forecast that this scale of corruption, the violence, all the stuff that would happen, would lead people's eyes to be opened, including those maybe not hardcore MAGA, but those, and understand the stakes of what was going on, and I believe that is the case. We are seeing that. The Americans are impatient also. No country has ever constructed a major pro-democracy movement, the illusory, the big tent, in 6 months. And I know you have other people talking about resistance and organizing, but what is important is that when we've had events, hands off, no kings, they have increased in size, because when you come out and protest, or you do things behind the scenes in other ways, economic boycotts, and you tell people you're doing them, that encourages people to join next time. And so there's momentum going on. But I believe that this reckoning will also be a reckoning into the things, with the things that have made us profoundly full of hypocrisies as a democracy. Do you know that the number one money launderer in the world is the United States? It's got it's the number one money laundering country, and it's been like that. Certain states have been very high in the international rankings for years: Delaware, South Dakota, and we're also the number one fossil fuel producer. And if we look at why Zoran Mondani got the response he did, he electrified things, it's also because people feel, and protest in the world, this is more generally, we're in a renaissance of protest globally, huge renaissance. And it's directed mostly to authoritarian states, but also to democracies, because people are understanding that neoliberal economics and fossil fuel, all of it is just leading to ruin. And so this reckoning, with the concentration of wealth around Musk, the corruption of Trump, the crypto, everything going on, it is going to open many people's eyes and hopefully lead to a process of rethinking about our democracy. Because we were on a really good path. The 2022 midterms gave us more diverse representation than ever before. We really were, and that is why we're having the backlash. And if you read Strongmen, it's 100 years of backlashes, and we're in that cycle. But we can recover. I am an optimist by nature. Otherwise, I'd go crazy writing this, being in the heads of these like awful people all the time. But or they're in my head more properly. But I believe that we will come out of this stronger as democracy.
Well, and I think increasingly I'm thinking along these lines as well about rejuvenation, right? But that's a word often autocrats use, right? So Xi Jinping talking about national rejuvenation. So I'm using it
Yes.
in a democratic way, and that thinking about how things are getting worse, they're getting bad. I think the economic impacts of all these policies, the inequality that it will induce, among many other things, things are going to get worse before they get better.
I was just going to say the same thing.
But political progress is nonlinear. And I think after that moment, how can we rebuild our institutions and strengthen our democracy? What are the kind of new ideas that we need to reinvigorate this political system, which I think even prior to Trump, people were beginning to sour on just the responsiveness and the quality of our democratic institutions. I want to be sensitive to time and also tee you up for one final moment of optimism here. One of the themes you were talking about in your work and in our remarks today is about weak, strong men. This idea that because of the nature of authoritarian government, these guys are not invincible. Why they might seem to be, and underneath them is not only usually an insecure, narcissistic character, but also some real deficiencies in their governance structure. And so a lot of people feel a little bit powerless, a little bit lost right now. I think there are feelings of despair. You talk about despair in your book at the end, about how how exhausting these types of moments can be. It can lead people to feel despair, and apathy is the friend of the autocrat, right? That's exactly what they want. And so can you provide people with 2 minutes of Ruth advice about what do I do in a time like this? How can normal citizens, people who don't hold power, who aren't influential, how can we all play our part and do our part in this moment?
Yes. So one of the things that authoritarians want to inculcate in us is hopelessness and helplessness, and to make us feel that whatever we do is not going to make a difference. But the very act of their cracking down on the free press, on protesters, makes us realize that they know our power. If they didn't think we had power, they wouldn't do these things. And so I think it's really important to do everything from, I think, registering people to vote. I'm very haunted by the tens of millions of people who no longer vote, and they don't do it because they feel apathy, and now they're particularly disillusioned. I think it's important to join some kind of civil society organization, to be active. And everyone can resist in their own way. I think there's a huge future for economic boycotts, and that's how you get to elites. Maria Stepan has a really good piece, the Horizons Project, talking about the way we need to disincentivize elites from collaborating, make them see that there's a price. And that has worked already in this Trump 2.0 period with certain corporations. So use your power, know that you have your own talents and ways that you can participate and resist. And also educate people. I think it's important to try and not give up. This is from the bridge building, not give up on those who are, I call it dwelling in the disinformation tunnel. There are different opinions about this. Some people feel you just have to leave those folks alone. I think it's important to try and have conversations. And that is because things are going to, as Rory said, things are going to get worse. Meaning, I will just end with my mother's Social Security was terminated in June. She's 92, she has dementia, and she was doged. They have a fraud flag because she has dementia and she could not answer the questions properly. She lives in England, so it makes it more complicated. Many, many people are losing their benefits. Their eyes are going to be opening, and this is the time to go in and speak to them. So that's a range of things that we can do. And I know people are disillusioned with the Democratic Party, the official party, but this is why civil society, apart from parties, has been so important in the history of resistance against authoritarianism.
We will leave it there. And it's a nice segue. Our next session next week is with Erica Chenoweth. Erica is at Harvard University. I'm sure you know their work. Very prominent scholar of opposition, civic engagement. How can opposition be effective in times like this? Please join me virtually in thanking Ruth Ben-Ghiat. If you'd like to follow Ruth's work, I really recommend her Substack, which is called Lucid. She writes weekly and features a lot of interesting conversations, not just about the United States, but about global authoritarianism. And at the moment, over 70% of the world's population lives under some form of authoritarianism. And so now is a really important time to be thinking about these ideas. So thank you all for coming. Thank you again to Ruth, and hope to see you next week.